up, y'all? Welcome to today's episode of the BeMe podcast. I'm your host, psychiatrist Dr. Taiwo Alonge, and today we're so excited to have with us a basketball and multimedia phenom, a builder of communities by the millions, and an absolute champion on and off the court and fierce advocate for women in sports, Chloe Pavlech. Time for me to brag a little bit. Chloe's journey begins long before she steps on a collegiate court, but at Maryland as a Terrapin, she was an ACC all-freshman, a Big Ten all-academic after they switched conferences, a team captain, an integral part of the team's Final Four runs in 2014 and 2015. After that, she went on to work and be part of the coaching staff at UConn and Baylor women's basketball teams, adding a few more March Madness bids and 2 Final Four berths. In the new era of NIL deals, which stands for name, image, and likeness, Chloe was a big part of Baylor Athletic Department's NIL Council, helping the university be the #1 Big 12 school in NIL compensation for their players. The buck doesn't stop there. In addition to her playing and coaching career in the NCAA, Chloe has expertise building brands and expanding the reach and impact of every company and organization she's been a part of. She founded the Overtime Women's Basketball Account, which has the largest women's basketball account following on Instagram at over 1 million followers, has helped build the fastest growing sports account on TikTok called Together, and has founded her own brand called Sad Girl Hours, whose mission is to help keep girls in sports. What a superstar. We're so happy to have her here with us. And a little fun fact, her and I are connected by an amazing person who we both love dearly. So shout out to her for making this conversation possible. Chloe, welcome. Is there anything else you would like to add? Did I get that all right?
First of all, you make me sound so amazing. And I may have to call you every time I need a confidence booster builder because that was a phenomenal intro.
Awesome. Well, you are amazing. So I'm happy to do that boost, but you're amazing. To start our podcast, we usually like to ask our guests what they were like as teenagers. So take a moment to go down memory lane. Think a little bit about what you were like as a teenager, what circles you ran in, what activities you participated in high school. Who was teenage Chloe?
Wow. As a teenager, I would say I had this unwavering, unreal, larger than life type of confidence. I feel really blessed to have had that. And I think a lot of that was instilled in me from a young age from my mom, who really empowered me to just believe that I could do absolutely anything, whether it was become the next president, become Oprah, be in the WNBA, coach, whatever it was. She was like, you can do it. You just have to practice and you just have to work hard. As far as my friends, I would say all of my friends were super high achieving people, which made it really easy. I think also to be successful, because I'm a firm believer in who you hang around is who you become. And so I feel really lucky that my friends not only protected me, but were super understanding of all of my goals and dreams. And especially when it came to sport, they just always protected me, understood if I couldn't make a birthday because I had an AAU tournament. You don't never stop being my friend, which I think is really important and critical when you're young. And I think I had a lot of guy friends too, who they'd be in the gym with me. I tell the story all the time. In 5th and 6th grade, there were 3 to 4 other guys in my class, and I was in band class, and I chose the trumpet because it only had 3 buttons. But little did I know the trumpet is one of the hardest instruments to play. And I thought it would be easy because there was just 3 buttons. But I would skip band class, and me and my guy friends, we would go 2-on-2 full court in the gym. So not great that I was cutting band class, but if it was to play sports, I would say that's good trouble. And that just tells you a little bit about who I was growing up.
First of all, shout out to moms always and the homies and the friends. It sounds like you had a really good group of people around you to help you kind of be who you are today. And I think music is cool, but hoops are better. I'm a little biased on that. I'm sure you are too. And you obviously have had an amazing and inspiring journey in the world of basketball. Would love to take a second to think about the beginning and share some of the highlights of your time as a hooper. Specifically, what age did you step onto the court for the first time? What were some of the most memorable achievements in your career as a player and a coach? Any moments or experiences that stand out to you?
Yeah. If we take it back to just the very beginning, probably my favorite memory has to deal with joining my first girls basketball team. So I'm old enough where there weren't necessarily a lot of opportunities to just play with girls in sports. A lot of sports teams, you still had to start off by playing with boys. There was no option to just have a girls team. And so I played for boys the longest time, which I actually think really helped me. And I was super lucky to be on boys teams where they also kind of looked at me as a little sister. They were super protective of me. And at the same time, I just remember, I think it was third grade, I went to North Avondale Montessori in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I'm a product of Cincinnati Recreation Center. My mom was a single mom, worked I would say like 9 to 6 job and had to commute from Covington, Kentucky to probably like a 45-minute drive to where we were based in Ohio. But I remember coming home one day to my mom saying, "Mom, there's a girls team and I really want to play with them and I really want to join it." And not knowing at this time, the team that I was choosing had a youth coach that was super, super hard on every single athlete. And so you had to really commit that you wanted to do this. But I think playing on a girls team helped me fall in love with basketball because I started creating a sisterhood. So I think growing up when you're really into sports as a girl, a lot of the times you could be more of a tomboy. You're friends with boys just because boys at that age seemed to be more involved in sports than girls were. And I just identified more with them because we had some of the same interests and passions. And so you have to keep in mind, this is the first time I was exposed to people that looked like me and were like me and enjoyed the same things that I did. And so I found this newfound sisterhood. And I just remember I would practice with my age group. And then one of the girls that was one of my good friends at the time, she would be like, "Yo, stay in practice with the older girls too." And I was like, "I'm allowed to do that?" And I remember asking my mom if I could stay longer. And I'm so lucky my mom would always say yes. If I wanted to do something extra, my mom never hesitated to say yes and would always make sure I either got there or stayed there. And so I would practice for hours, not just with my age group, but with the older age group. And I got so much better from being around older girls who were a lot better than me. But it was also really cool because I felt like I had a bunch of big sisters. And I felt really confident, and it just felt really cool that we all had similar goals. And that's probably my favorite memory. And then I'd say my next favorite memory is I tried out for the jump rope team, and you had to get this move down, and it was called at the time the Kruger. And I just remember being in my grandma's driveway, and I would practice for hours and hours. And I finally had gotten the move. And I remember how excited I was to tell my mom and to tell my grandma. And my mom helped me connect the dots with when you practice and you work at something, you can achieve it. And that really just set the foundation for my hard work. So those are the two memories as far as when I was younger that really stick out.
Wow, it really says a lot about you. Just thinking about how decorated your career is, both as a player and a coach, and for those to be the kind of salient memories that come up. I mean, it says a lot about you. It says a lot about the relationship you have with your mom. So again, big shout outs to mom and those experiences in Cincy and where you're from and all of that. I think that's so awesome. And I played a little bit of basketball too in high school, not college, not as good as you. So maybe you can have a one-on-one one day, but we'll say that for another day. But I know how hard it was to balance for me, school and my relationships and everything. And I can imagine that was a million times harder for you and for anyone who plays at the college level. Thinking about playing at such a high level, any challenges that you faced, whether that be mentally, physically, in your relationships, and who and what helped you navigate all of that?
Yeah, immediately, and I tell this to all of my athletes too, when you decide to play a sport in college or you decide to specialize in something else outside of your pursuits to study something in college, if you're going to school on a athletic scholarship, I always say you can only be great at two things. You can't be great at all three. So at that time, I looked at it into 3 buckets. And now things have changed just because there's NIL. There's so many other things that play a part versus when I was in school. But when I was in school, it was school, your sport, which for me was obviously basketball, and then social. So to me, it's like you could be really good at two, but you can't be really good at all three, right? So if you pour more into one bucket, you're pouring a little less into the others. And I think capturing that balance was really tough. So my freshman year, I put a lot of work into basketball and I put a lot of work into socializing, to the point where my head coach was trying to figure out how my second semester as a freshman, I didn't have any classes on Friday. And on top of that, I just remember the first semester, I believe, in college is incredible because it's the first time your parents don't have access to your grades. You have to tell the university or you have to tell your teachers that you can send my grades to my parents. And I made sure I opted out of all of that. Like, there was going to be no grades going back home to my mom. And I just remember at that time, Maryland was in the ACC, and the ACC all academic team came out. And my mom was like, why aren't you on the all academic team? And I told her, this is one of my first big lies. I said to her, Mom, I don't know why. They must have made a mistake, or maybe they didn't send my grades in or something. And little did she know I had a C or a D in American history at the time. And that was my first ever C in my life. When I learned quickly that, okay, you can't get by in college by not studying. I don't care how smart you are, you have to study, or you have to figure out what works with each professor's class. What will make me better at this class or that class? So for me, it was a little bit about trial and error. And luckily, those errors weren't too massive or too big. But I think it's easier said than done. And I think you just have to understand you do sacrifice things. My sophomore year and junior year, I probably sacrificed basketball a little bit more than I should have, because I poured more into academics and more into my overall social experience in college, because you should experience what it's like to be a student at your university. But at the same time, I think it's really hard for people that play sports in college that either can't go pro, don't have aspirations to go pro, or aren't good enough to go pro, because you have to truly know yourself at that age. And when you're 18 to 22 years old, no one knows themselves, right? Like, college is all about figuring out who you are at your core. And life is kind of about that as well too, right? Like, I didn't get confident in who I was as a person until these past few years. And so you can imagine when you're 18 to 22 years old and you have to make a decision about what you want to do and what you want to be for the rest of your life, it feels pretty crazy. So for me, I would say I got lucky because I found a core group of sisterhood who I'm still friends with today outside of my sport that helped me see the bigger picture of who I was going to become and what I wanted to believe, what I wanted to be in life.
Such important themes covered there, including sisterhood and the importance of community, and kind of just the difficulties of balancing being a student athlete and being an athlete in general. And I'm sure many things that make people want to quit sports sometimes. And it feels like a really good and relevant time to pivot a little bit to talk about your brand, Sad Girl Hours. And yeah, I'd just love to hear you tell us about what inspired you to create the brand and its purpose.
Yeah, it started off as, and still is, a passion project. So for me, I've always looked at basketball as therapy. And I think a lot of times, because sports are so competitive, there is so much pressure in sport. Sometimes we lose that fun aspect. And I think it's more important than ever to have and to make sure we keep giving girls the opportunity to participate in sports, because they're dropping out 2 times the rate that boys are. So for me, my motto has been keep girls in sports, because where I am today, I don't get here without my mom, but I also don't get here if I didn't stay in sports. And I think when you go through things, there's so many things that happen in your life, right? Like, your parents could go through a divorce. There are things like, unfortunately, like your parents could pass away while you're at a very young age, or maybe it has something to deal with you're not experiencing as much playing time these days. So now you don't think you like your sport. And the reality is you do love your sport. You miss playing as much as you once were. So there are all these different factors. And to me, you can use sport as therapy. For me, I poured into basketball, not always just to get better, but also to feel better. And I think there's a distinct difference. And I never realized that I wasn't the only one that was doing that, right? I wasn't the only one that saw basketball as therapy. And it really hit for me, and this is why I call it sad girl hours, is because my first year coaching at Baylor University, I was very new to this role. I didn't have a lot of experience, and I just wanted to be the best I could within my role. And I would stay really late hours just to kind of figure out and get a grasp on things, not necessarily to get ahead, but just to get better at what I was currently doing. And I remember one of our players coming into the gym really late. And, at Baylor, our offices overlook the practice gym. So you're in your office, but you can see everything going on in the gym. And at that time, it was 11 p.m. at night. And I looked out because I heard music. I heard Drake. I heard SZA. I heard Rod Wave, which if any of you are familiar with those artists, they really pour into their music, their emotions. A lot of times they have a lot of sad songs, right? Because they're talking about their experiences that they've either overcome or things that they're currently going through. And one of our players was shooting, but wasn't necessarily, I don't want to say not working hard, but not necessarily working on things that we teach, and was really just kind of getting shots up. But, the music was blasting, but I understood at that time when I texted her and I was just like, hey, just checking in. Are you okay? Want to make sure I give you space, because I know when I was younger and I would go to the gym alone, it's good to go to the gym by yourself, right? Because that's where therapy was, especially for me. And she said something similar, and she was like, yep, I'm here to feel better. And I just texted her back and I said, well, if there's anything I can do to help with that, please let me know. And she just said, thank you for seeing me and acknowledging me. And it was at that moment I was like, okay, these are sad girl hours. And sad girl hours are when you use your sport as therapy, not to get better, but to feel better, right? And when do we typically get sad, right? When do we think of things? It's not during the day. We could go through a whole day and no one will notice anything that's wrong with us because we wear these masks. We feel like we have to act or present as a certain way. And then when we get home, either when we're by ourselves or when we decide to go work out or get in the gym, that's when we start processing more and more of our emotions, or we have time to unpack and unload and write down what happened to us and why we're sad. So to me, Sad Girl Hours is about keeping girls in sports so that they have the opportunity to not just succeed, but to feel better, to acknowledge and work on their mental health. Because I think as athletes, we're expected to always perform, always be on, and there aren't a lot of considerations of what else is going on in our lives, right? Like why maybe can't we perform to the best of our ability? And maybe we haven't been able to unpack things that we have been experiencing. So to me, Sad Girl Hours is a community, and we just don't want any girl to ever think, or anyone, however you identify, that you're alone, right? There's a community of all of us. We just have to find each other.
Wow, such important work, and you use your platform in such amazing ways, thinking about basketball as therapy. I know for me in my work as a mental health professional, I talk to my clients so much about the importance of exercise and team sports, working with college athletes as their mental health professional or therapist. So I really love what you're doing with Sad Girl Hours, and I'm excited to see all the things that will continue to unfold with that. Kind of segueing and pivoting a little bit, I would love to kind of hear a lot more about your work in women's sports and social media. Over the last few years, women's sports has reached its long overdue spotlight, especially women's basketball, with young stars like Juju Watkins, Angel Reese. Can you speak a little bit about what this moment means for and for Jennifer this in real time?
I think it's incredible to witness and see what's happening in women's sports in real time. For me personally, it's everything that I always expected and thought women's sports would be. I think for me, where this kind of media journey all starts is I just remember, I believe it was in 2015, my senior year, a man named Marcus Crenshaw reached out to me, and he was talking about starting and posting women's basketball highlights. And he said, do you think girls would want to see their highlights? I'm like, of course, girls would want to see their highlights. Boys have mixtapes. And at that time, there was a company called Pass the Ball, who I work with now. And Pass the Ball would put out mixtapes, which were incredible. But you had to be like really, really good. Like anyone who had a mixtape that was a girls basketball player, I guarantee you is in the WNBA. To me, though, I had always thought, I've always said this example, and I'm so happy for Candace Parker in her retirement, but I always talk about what if Candace Parker and LeBron James received the same amount of coverage starting from 7th grade? And I'm not saying Candace Parker would be as big or bigger than LeBron, but where would her stardom be in comparison to LeBron James if they were given equal coverage? So when Marcus started She Hoops Network and brought me along, I thought, this is an incredible platform. And at that time, I was just posting because I was passionate about it and because I didn't necessarily see myself in traditional media. And I also didn't have opportunities for linear television at that time. So in my mind, I was like, okay, an Instagram account and this is when Instagram was just getting video, right? So we're talking a long time ago. And it was an opportunity for me, but I had always said, women's basketball is cool. We just need to show how cool it is. And the way people would cover women's basketball was even so different than how it's covered now, right? Like right now, it's cool to be a girls basketball player. It's cool to be a hooper. It's cool to support women's basketball and women's sports, but it's always been cool to me. And when we were doing this, all of a sudden I went on to coach or be a graduate assistant at the University of Connecticut. And because of recruiting, I had to stop posting on She Hoops Network, or I couldn't necessarily be affiliated because it was against NCAA rules, but I still helped provide strategy to Marcus at the time. So then when I finished at UConn, I went back to She Hoops Network and we continued to build. And then one day Marcus was like, Overtime reached out to me. They want to buy the Instagram account. And I was like, they want to buy an Instagram account? And I'm thinking Overtime, like we're scamming Overtime at that time. I always saw the vision for women's basketball and women's sports, but I don't think I saw what Overtime saw at that time, which was a huge opportunity to build a large digital media company as a whole. And so end up selling that account to Overtime and I get a job out of it. And I was so happy. I was so excited. And I never understood kind of what we were building and what we were doing until one day I went to a girls' basketball tournament and they were like, Overtime Chloe. And I was like, no, like it's just Chloe. But there were these young girls that were following me. And then they were asking me about like Jada Williams, Paige Beckers, Azzi Fudd, Juju Watkins. And I'm like, yeah, like they're really good. And they're like, no, like, but you're Overtime Chloe. Do you know them? And at the time, I knew Azzi Fudd and we had been covering Jada Williams since 5th grade, but I didn't really know them super well. And then it wasn't until Azzi Fudd, I went to her game and she said, hey, Chloe, I love what you're doing, but you need to be covering Paige Beckers. And I was like, Paige Beckers? I was like, yeah, I've heard the name, but I'm like, okay. And so I look up some of her mixtapes and her highlights on Courtside Films. And Courtside Films is incredible. They do a lot for youth sports and coverage. And I was like, wow, she's really fun to watch. And so I started posting her more and more, and I started making sure there were filmers at all of her games. And then over time, I finally got them, like the main account, to want to post her and to like her and to watch her play. And she just started blowing up and going viral. And then I would go to WNBA events, and WNBA players would ask me about Paige. Oh, is she really that good? And I'm like, WNBA players know who these kids are in high school. These kids, even in junior high, these kids have bigger followings than some of these NBA or WNBA players because of what we're building. And it was then where I was like, okay, the democratization of coverage for women's sports is the best thing that could ever happen, because now we're allowing and helping people be able to follow these stars and get to know these stars at such a young age, right? So we're helping them become stars before they even turn 18. And so then I remember going to see Jada Williams play in person, and I also saw Paige Beckers in person. And it was to the point where you couldn't even get in the gym. And I was like, okay, this is crazy, but this is so cool. And it was the same thing with Juju Watkins and her mom. And Juju Watkins' mom was like, I think my kid is pretty good. Like, you guys should cover her. And I'm like, everyone says that about their kid. But I was like, okay, whatever, we'll check her out. She's in 8th grade at the time, and she's making pro moves. And I call Juju's mom back, who's Sarai, and I said, oh no, your kid is really good. And so we start to cover her. And I say this all the time, like, Juju Watkins was going to be a star no matter what. And it's really important to have a support system and parents that believe in you, because the way Juju Watkins' mom believes in her is something that I wish every kid had from their parents. And it's been incredible to watch her journey. She's one of my favorite kids of all time. But seeing these stars emerge, and same thing with Malaysia Fulwiley, just reinforced even now when they're getting more coverage. They're on these even bigger platforms where millions of people get to be able to watch them. I'm like, okay, like, we've figured out the key. And the key is, if you give these girls and these women a platform, people will come and show up to watch. So for me, it's been gratifying. It's been so cool to see. I've gotten to meet my heroes, and like Sue Bird and Candace Parker know my name. And I never thought that would happen, which is pretty cool. And I just feel super fortunate and super blessed to give back to a game that's given me so many different opportunities.
Wow. That's so awesome to hear, because I remember as a kid watching like hoop mixtapes of like people like Akil Carr and Seventh Woods and being like, they're so amazing. And it's cool that you've been able to replicate that for girls and women. And that's massive. And I know you're probably way too humble to acknowledge this, but you played such a huge part in getting women's basketball to where it is right now. And I am sure there's hundreds, if not thousands, of kids and girls and young women who are playing the sport and who've stayed in the sport because of the work that you do. So pat yourself on the back, and I'll make sure to pat you on the back next time I see you for it, because it's so important. And, you know, thinking a little bit about women athletes and social media, and kind of with this presence and the spotlight, there's also been a lot of hate, sexism, racism, lots of anti-LGBTQ attacks on social media by people. And I can only imagine on players and people who might be watching the sport, particularly little girls who might be interested in watching basketball and playing basketball. I'm curious, from your standpoint, what would you recommend, or what thoughts do you have on ways that young women and girls can handle the negativity they see on social media and still remain inspired to put themselves out there on social media so they can get the necessary and important shine that they deserve for the hard work they put into their sport?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think, number one, to address specifically all of the adults on social media, to just remember, at the end of the day, when you put out a statement, whether it's positive or negative, you're talking about someone's daughter. And I think even for someone like me, where I've served as a player, a coach, an analyst, a journalist, a creator, a builder, I too have to also remember that, because I like to share my opinions on social media. I like to always leave it at performance, but even understand whenever I'm putting something out into the world, especially because for me personally, I am super sensitive. On my social media, you can't say anything to me. I have every word blocked that you could possibly think of that would hurt my feelings. And so one, I recommend taking those type of actions if you're an athlete or a public figure, or you receive criticism and hate from time to time or every day. I think for me, what I'd love to tell all of those athletes is try not to read those comments. And it's easier said than done. But I think TikTok and Instagram and Threads have done an incredible job of being able to give you features where it's only people you know can comment, where you can block out certain words and you can do that. But a lot of it goes to show, me personally, I've taken steps to be completely off of X or Twitter because I do think people tend to be extremely negative on that platform. And to me, it's about walking away. You can take steps to not be on certain platforms on social media, or you can take steps to protect yourself. And so I urge everyone to protect themselves as much as possible. But at the end of the day, I think people saying mean and negative things, it's like, what do you gain out of all that? And I feel sorry for those people and I pray for those people. But like I said, at the end of the day, you're talking about someone's daughter. So for those athletes to protect their mental health, please try to do everything you can on social media, not necessarily to stay away from it, because I'm a huge advocate for building your own brand, but any of the privacy controls that each platform offers to you, please use them as much as you can.
Yeah, I think that's an important message. And I think the things that you also mentioned about ways to protect yourself on social media, privacy measures, what words you might want to block, I think that's really awesome. It's really sad that we kind of exist in a social media ecosystem where people can be so harmful to people who are just trying to be themselves and showcase their lives and what they do. But again, I'm just inspired by you, and I know so many other people are as well. You've dropped so many gems for us here today, and it's an honor to have you as a guest. And while we still have you, I know our listeners, especially our young athletes, would love to hear from you. Any message you'd like to share to teens or young people who might be struggling, feeling isolated, maybe athletes who might be overwhelmed by the pressure of competition? What encouragement or advice might you offer them to help them navigate these challenges?
It always gets better, and we want you here. I think now more than ever, and I think it's really important to be able to have a community and people and have a safe space to talk to people about this. But I think at one point or another, we've all experienced a form of depression, some probably worse than others. But for me personally, it's been just being able to write in my journal. Like, that has been extremely therapeutic for me. And I think everyone has different types of therapy that works for them. Some people need to go to actual therapy, see a psychiatrist. I think everyone should be doing that. There's so much trauma that we all have to deal with and unpack. But on top of that, when you're young, everything seems like the end of the world. And I promise, if you live to fight another day, if you live to fight another year, you're going to see just how much better your life will have gotten from that dark time. And you should absolutely acknowledge those dark times and lean into them and feel them. But even when you feel like you can't talk to anyone, I promise you can. So whether that's a physical person, or to me, communication or talking could be pouring more into your sport, right? Getting back to a place, especially in sport, where you love the game. For me, when I wanted to quit basketball, I remember coming back home and I went to the first place where I fell in love with the game of basketball. And I just went back there, and it reminded me like why I started playing, why I started loving it. And so if you don't hear anything else in this podcast, it's just that we want you here, and I promise it gets better.
What a star she is. What an inspiration. Chloe, thank you so much for joining us today. I know all of our listeners will have their cup filled listening to this and learning from you, just like I have today. Until next time, I'm Dr. Alonge, along with our podcast producer, Derek, reminding you to keep being you. Peace.